Hey everyone, welcome to another session of A Day in the Life of a BA. I'm James, the president of IIBA Ireland, and I'll be your host today. At IIBA Ireland, our mission is to support professionals by sharing knowledge, common terminology, and practical insights into the work of business analysts across different industries or sectors. And that's the whole point of this series, to give you a chance to hear directly from BA professionals about their typical day. So each month, we're inviting a BA professional to share their personal journey, highlighting the approaches they take, the technologies that they rely on, the tasks that they do, the tools and techniques that they use, and the challenges and successes that they have encountered within their industry. So whether you're considering a career in business analysis, already working alongside another business analyst, or just simply looking to deepen your understanding of the role, today's session is designed to give you the clarity, confidence, and a shared language for working effectively with business analysts. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Emal, a business analyst who has worked in the HR sector. Emal will be walking us through his day in the life within this sector and sharing practical insights into his experience. Please feel free to turn on your cameras, and throughout the session, you're more than welcome to interact with other attendees using the chat function. And if there's any questions, you can drop them into the Q&A tab and you can ask Emal through. So without further ado, Emal, it's over to you.
Thank you, James, and welcome everyone. My name is Emal Bariali, and today we are going to be exploring one of the many domains that I have worked across in the last 20 years that I've been doing business analysis. And what I'd like to do in this session is really, I'll quickly just introduce myself and a little bit of my background, and what we'll do. So what I have on the agenda for you here. So I'll tell you a little bit about who I am, and then we're going to dive right into a day in the life. And instead of looking at a day, I'm going to look at a week. We can pick a day if we want out of that week, because I have a snapshot of my calendar from a couple of months ago, and we can basically just walk through, and I'll basically tell you essentially what I do, or what I did on this consulting engagement. Spend a lot of time here. Have a couple of visuals to share with you to kind of explain the timeline of my work, and to kind of explain to you that what a business analyst does when they are spread across multiple projects, especially if they are working on large scale transformations. So like we'll spend quite a bit of time there. What I'd also like to do, though, is to kind of take a step back and just talk about domains in general, because there are many different domains that we have the ability to specialize in. I want to kind of just take a step back and explain to you what that world looks like, in case you're in the process where you're trying to figure out what domain is right for you. HR may or may not be the right domain for you, but I can almost guarantee you that you'll find a domain that you like, because there are so many options that are available. And then if we want, we can do a bit of a deep dive into the actual HR domain, where I'll talk about high level architectural views when it comes to business processes and systems, talk about the operations level, about what business analysts really actually do in within the HR domain. And then we can take a quick little look at some of the data. And then at the end, if we have time, tell you about a couple of other things we got going on here, but I'll park that for now, because we've kind of built out a full universe that we use to teach business analysts all the BA skills. So if anybody wants to hear about that afterwards, I'll talk about that. But let's dive in, and let's just start with the very first piece of what we want to talk about here. My name is Emal Bariali, as I said earlier. I'm a BA consultant, and an independent BA consultant, and I work mostly out of the Greater Toronto area. I am the founder and managing partner of BA Blocks, where we teach business analysts how to do this job properly. And most recently, I have founded goodbusinessanalyst.com. And this is essentially, I'm hoping we can get some very senior business analysts to start coaching other business analysts. And so that's what the whole purpose of Good Business Analyst is as well. So very early on in my career, I had started my career basically around the year 2000, what I like to call my foundational stage. This is where I was studying to become a business analyst. And that basically lasted close to about 7 years. It was, technically speaking, I started around 1998, actually, but we'll just say 2000 to keep it clean. Then I entered my competence stage, what I like to call my competence stage around 2005. And that's when I landed my first job as a business analyst and started to try to build as many skills as I possibly could. So I spent a good amount of time, about close to about 7 or 8 years, until I hit what I like to call my monetization stage. Because for the between 2000 and 2012, I'd spent a lot of money getting educated. I spent over about $100,000 in Canadian dollars to get myself an undergrad, post-diploma, master's degree. And in my competence stage, I made some money, but not nearly the type of money I wanted to make. All right. And so 2012 is the year where I decided I've learned enough to be able to really monetize all of the investment that I've made into myself and into my skill set. And that's when that's when I started really trying to make as much money as I possibly could. Around 2018, 2020 is when I think I hit what I like to call my legacy stage. Okay. And that's kind of what I'm in right now. My legacy stages, I've around 2018 is where I felt like I'd hit the top of the profession because I hit the top of how much money I could make in this profession. And I had a couple of other softer goals that I'd set for myself in 2012. And that's around 2018. It wasn't really like an all of a sudden thing, but somewhere between 2018 and 2020, I realized I think I've hit the top. I don't think I can go any further in this career. And that's when I basically what I started to do is I started to travel full time. Is around 2020. So I've taken up the digital nomad lifestyle right now, and all I do is basically just travel the world, teach, and do BA consulting, and that's my entire life basically. Most recently, okay, so that's kind of like my business card. If I want to show you 10,000 foot view of who I am, last month and a half ago now, I actually bought this van that you see here. Okay. And I drove all the way up to the Arctic Ocean. That was my most recent trip. And what that basically meant, if you look at it on Google Maps, is that I'm here in Toronto, right down here. And I basically went all the way up. And Canada is the second biggest country in the world here, right? I basically did that drive all the way up. I took about a month off after I finished my consulting engagement and I went all the way up there just to kind of enjoy it. So if you want to follow along with those antics, you can always connect with me. My on Instagram, it's just my name, Emal Bariali. Okay. All of that said, let's dive in. Let's dive into the details because for us to talk about day in the life of a business analyst, we kind of have to understand the big picture of what it is that a business analyst actually does. And I'm sure many of you already have a good sense of what BAs do, but I finished a consulting engagement a couple of months ago, and what are we in December now? So I finished that in October 2025, which is about 2 months ago. And then I did my road trip, and here we are now, basically. So this is a very recent consulting engagement that I finished, and it was about a year long, about 13 months long, essentially. On that project, they had me doing a bunch of different things. And this is where things as a business analyst, before I can talk about a single day, I want to give you this big picture view so you kind of see what's going on really at a bird's eye view. Because if I tell you about one specific day, I might just choose an easy day. The few and far in between as they are, give you an easy day, but this hopefully gives you a bigger context. And we'll once we get down to the day, you'll see why my calendar looks the way that it does. But they had me essentially doing a bunch of different projects. I won't go through these in detail. We did that on a previous talk, but what you should notice here is that anytime you are working especially if you're working in a fairly large organization, you're typically not working on one thing at a time, right? You're usually spread quite thin, sometimes depending on how many projects are going on. You spread quite thin. So when I first joined this project, for example, they had me doing this project and we had a bit of a false start on this project. So I put it on hold. But essentially at any given time on this timeline, you can see that I'm usually working on usually more than one thing. Okay. And what that means is that typically your attention gets spread between different projects that you're working on. So all of these projects that I have are all HR-based projects. Okay. And The way that I kind of like to break them down is to just kind of show you a little bit about what the scope and the size of these projects was, so you can get a sense of the type of projects that I do in my consulting work at this point in my career. So for project number one, essentially, we had a team of about 30 people, 30 people that we needed to engage altogether. For this project here, there was a team of about 200 people. And the reason why I like to kind of point this out is because stakeholder engagement for a business analyst is one of the most critical, but sometimes one of the most difficult tasks. And so when you first start out your career as a business analyst, you may be put in a position where you have a single stakeholder to deal with all the time in your life. And you think, okay, well, this is business analysis. It's easy, right? You build a relationship with that person. And if you're supporting that person, let's say for 6 months or a year, there's a whole aspect of your career that it's become easy just because of the fact that you only have one stakeholder to deal with. Okay. That is not the world. That is not all of business analysis, because once you start to get onto larger and larger projects, your ability to understand who's who and your ability to go to the right person at the right time for the right thing in the right way, that becomes like about 50% of the job. So for example, if I have a stakeholder set of 30 different people, I have to know exactly what these 30 people do and how they contribute to the project and when I need to go to them for. Just managing that group of 30 people now is a massive task on its own before I've done any kind of analysis work, right? So this is kind of, I just kind of meant to kind of just show you that there's a wide scale of the number of stakeholders you have to deal with depending on the scale of transformation that you're on. Okay? If you're a business analyst just supporting one application and you're just doing bug fixes and defects and things like that, you'll have a very small stakeholder set. The minute you get onto a massive digital transformation, that stakeholder set grows. Okay. Now, as I was working all throughout these projects, okay, I had taken, this was a while ago, I posted this on LinkedIn, and that's why I still have the image, but this was a calendar. I think this was from July. This is the week essentially in 2025 that this calendar is from. And as I start to scroll down through this calendar, right, you'll start to see, maybe you'll recognize some of the tasks that are in there. I don't know if you do. And for the folks that do or don't, we can turn this into an interactive conversation. Raise your hands and let me know. Is there anything that you see in here that you recognize? Maybe just from having studied business analysis, or if you're an analyst and you do this job. Are there any terms that you recognize? No hands? Oh, Jack, yes, maybe you were speaking, but I think you're on mute. Let me see if we can.
I would say
No, you're okay?
BRD, business requirement documentation. I can see that.
Yeah, Isaac sees it right away. BRD, right? This big one right here. That's a very, very common one that we see, right? But what you'll typically see on a calendar of an analyst who's kind of spread across a bunch of different things is that you have a lot of other things that are very, very domain specific. So for example, like what does location PSA mean? What does that even mean? If you're not in the HR domain, working with very specific products, HR products, you might not even know what that stuff means, right? You might see like, what is this conversation about event reason codes over here? Okay. What did these things mean here? Okay, so the HR, maybe you maybe know. LMS, maybe you do or don't know. Legal, well, legal was kind of the legal department that we had to talk to in that meeting there. Okay. That essentially what happens is that without having the domain knowledge, it becomes very difficult for you to have conversations about things like PAPSAs, right? It gets very difficult for you to have conversations around the topics that your customers need you to understand for you to be able to help them properly. All right. And so when you look at a calendar like this, let's see what else jumps out at you, right? So there are some terms that we understand. The BRD, we know that that's a business requirements document. That's an analysis term. We can talk about, there's a lot of conversations around BRDs and Agile and everything else, and there's a lot of misconceptions around what actually happens on the ground. We can have those conversations if we need to. But essentially what this week is full of is me working across multiple different projects on very, very specific issues. Okay. This conversation right here that we talked about earlier, I'll tell you the background and story behind what this meeting was about. Inside of every HR system, there are a bunch of different data elements that have to exist for HR systems to work properly. Okay. What is the purpose of an HR system? The purpose of an HR system, if you kind of take a step back, I'm going to go back all the way down to here. The purpose of an HR system is to help manage what is called the employee life cycle. What is that life cycle? Well, the life cycle of an employee at a company is basically all of the different stages that a person goes through as they are working with a certain organization. Okay. Typically, before you become an employee at a company, you have been an applicant at that company. So that's essentially the start of your life cycle, right? As an employee, if you look at it from your own point of view. When you apply for something, maybe you got shortlisted and you made it to the interview stage. What happened is that you actually became what they call a candidate. Once you got hired at this point here, that's when you became a worker at that company. And you may have stayed at that company for a long period of time. And that is typically the longest stage of the employee life cycle. Okay. And then there is a certain point. Let me just get rid of a couple of things here for us to kind of clean this up. Let's get rid of that, put it over there. At a certain point, you will hopefully be in a position where you get to become a pensioner. End to end, that's essentially the employee life cycle. And that's what the purpose of HR systems is. And that is what the purpose of the entire HR department or the HR division is to manage that employee life cycle. So how hard could it be? How hard could it actually be to manage that? Well, let's imagine you have one employee. It's very easy if you have a company with one employee, right? But when the set of employees you have scales to 1,000, okay, well, now you need the system to manage the data about all of those different people and to manage the history and to make sure that those people are paid properly, to make sure that they have all of their benefits lined up properly. And there's this whole area of employee management that has to happen throughout this. And typically, that is handled by a division called human resources. Inside the company, some people may call it human capital management. Some people, there's a lot of different names, but it's essentially the HR function inside the company that these processes and systems are supporting to make sure that the employee lifecycle is supported. The way that most HR divisions are broken up is into separate units. So you might have your recruitment team, which they typically call talent acquisition. You have business partners, which are people who help managers manage their employees. You have support services that help workers manage all of everything related to their employment. You'll typically have an information systems unit within that division. And then there are the people who decide who gets paid how much. The HR compensation people. There's always a HR risk and compliance department that's just makes sure that we're not violating anybody's rights or that we're not proposing any human-related risk to the company. And then finally, there is the payroll team that just makes sure that people get paid the right amount on time and that there's a lot of other math that goes behind essentially pay. Those are usually the divisions and the units. But when we go back to that question to ask, hey, how hard could it possibly be to support the worker life cycle? Well, when your company gets large, let's just go through all of the different processes that they have to put into place to be able to support that life cycle. Okay. So you have these are the groups, right? These are the departments that you have within your HR division. Let's take a look really quickly here at the business processes that are involved. Let me grab a better pen here. Let's look at the business processes because typically when the person is at the applicant or the candidacy stage, there's a whole lot of data that gets generated, a lot of processes that have to be followed to move a person, to hire a person into the company, essentially. Okay, most companies they'll box all of those processes into a process group called recruitment to onboarding, and that means that you basically have a set of processes that are recruitment related and a set of processes that are onboarding related. What did the processes look like? Well, there is something called a requisitioning process. What does that even mean? This is actually one of the processes that we teach inside of our class. We use this as an example to teach how to do business analysis, but this is, we have this company called Peterson and Baker that we've kind of made up inside of our universe there. But that single process, that one process that I just pointed out to you, the requisitioning process, could look something like this. Okay, what is requisitioning? Requisitioning is when a hiring manager wants to hire a new employee, they want to fill a position that they have open inside their department, they have to create what's called a requisition. Okay, they don't just get to go out and hire somebody, they got to go through this whole process to get a person just even approved for, or get to even get the job posting approved to go out, right? And this is what a typical manual process can look like, right? That hiring manager has to basically fill out a form. They have to send it to their HR business partner. That HR business partner, might come back and interview the manager before they even put a job posting out to hire for that person, because they want to understand what that manager needs, right? And the HR business person may have to go and talk to finance to say, hey, does this manager even have the budget to hire somebody, right? There's a whole finance aspect. Who's paying this person? Where's the money coming? Like there's a lot of these types of questions that have to get answered inside the company just so the manager can put in the request to say, hey, can you please put out this job posting so I can hire someone, right? This entire process that you're looking at, right? This entire process is this process right here. That is just one of the recruitment processes that exist. Okay, because the minute that requisition gets approved, there's a whole process that the recruiter has to go through to put together the job posting. Okay, and they have to get that out. And there's again another process that is just as complicated as this one, right? As many steps that it takes to get a job posting out. Okay, then they collect applications. They shortlist those applications. They interview candidates, and they might finally make an offer. All of these processes, they seem like they're one-step processes. Like, how hard could it be? Well, the same way that I showed you what it takes for a manager to just ask for a job posting to go out, right? Let's go back here. This entire process here is the process that it takes for the manager just to get the approval to get a job posting sent out. The process of creating a job posting is itself quite involved. in the same way. Okay. The process of actually making an offer to a person is quite involved because there's a lot of things that can happen during the offer process. Renegotiations, you might have to go back to finance to say, hey, this person wants more money. Can we afford it? Can we give them some more? But like there's a whole process that they have to go through just to get the offer through. So hopefully, what this is doing, right? When you look at when we say HR, when somebody says, hey, I want to specialize in HR, HR is a huge area, right? Hopefully that's starting to sink in because we haven't even gotten the employee hired yet. And you see how many processes are involved. Okay. Wait till once we get the employee hired. Wow, there's this whole other world of other processes that the company has to have in place to make sure that they can manage the different aspects of an employee's life cycle. Right? So hopefully that kind of gives you this what we're looking at right now is called the architectural view, right, of the business architecture. These are just the business processes. This is how the business functions. There's this whole other world down here of the systems that are involved. Wow. So we have our core HR systems. You think, how hard could it be? Well, this recruitment module right here supports that recruitment process that we talked about, right? It supports all of the processes. This recruitment module supports all of the processes that you see inside of this box right here. Okay. Going back again, what are those processes? Requisitioning, job posting, applications, interview, offer, hire. And each module has a ton of functionality to be able to support that entire process. Okay. So when you start to look at enterprise scale, when you start to try to become a business analyst in a specific domain, you can say to yourself, hey, I want to specialize in HR, but no one person can specialize in all of these different areas. So what do you have to do is that you say, well, I'm really kind of a very, very good at understanding recruitment, right? And you might have a team of analysts. So typically most HR departments will have a couple of different analysts, and one of those analysts will be really good at the recruitment and onboarding piece. Another one will understand time management really well. Another analyst will understand the compensation world and maybe even the benefits world really well. So you might have a team of HR analysts that work at one company. So the last company I worked at, I think their team had 6 or 7 different analysts just on the HR, supporting the HR systems and processes. Okay. Now, when we're down here, right, when we're looking at the systems that are involved in all of this, you see that your HR systems are not necessarily living in isolation with each other because your HR system has to push data into systems that are owned by your business partners who are helping you manage compensation packages, that are helping you manage the benefits that you provide to your employees. They're helping you to manage the payroll that your company has to execute to pay people, right? And the minute you kind of scratch a little bit below the surface, you realize, oh, there's a lot of complexity in this world. I mean, why do we have so many different payroll providers? Well, if you're a global organization, if you want to pay somebody in the US and you want to pay somebody, let's say, in the UK, those are there's different sets of laws that have to be observed for what it takes to pay a person. What kind of deductions do you have to do? What kind of labor laws do you have to that you have to adhere to, right? The minute you start operating in more than one legal jurisdiction, everything has gotten way more complex. And most companies operate in many legal jurisdictions, right? Now, going back, okay, so we did a bit of a deep dive here. So let's pull us all back to the original question that I brought up from that one meeting request that was in my calendar. So going back to this question, what is location PA/PSA? Well, this meeting right here was about the location data that we have to have available inside of the system. Okay. The term PA stands for personnel area. It's a SAP term because they use SAP success factors as their HCM. And PSA stands for personnel sub area. Wow, I would have never known that, right? Nobody would have ever guessed that unless you had a little bit of domain knowledge in HR, or if you understood SAP's product very, very specifically. Okay, so that entire 1 hour conversation was about the fact that we didn't have the right data. We didn't have the right data in the system to be able to put people into. So for example, if I'm an employee working, let's say out of Toronto, Canada, in Toronto, this company might have 5 different locations. And the location that I'm in matters because it affects what kind of building access I have. It affects what kind of sometimes even IT access I have, right? These systems are all kind of strung together that if you get a little thing wrong, you think to yourself, well, how important can location data be? If you don't have the right office locations in the system, it's impossible for you to say, hey, this employee works out of this office. And if you can't say that you can't make that basic statement using the data in your HR systems, there's so many other things downstream that are affected by the HR systems that are not going to work properly. Okay. And that is the world that we have to live in. And HR is by no means the only domain that's this complicated. And it is, quite frankly, not the most complicated domain out there. There are many domains that get much, much more complicated than HR. But this one conversation right here is on that issue. Okay. This other conversation that I had over here, let's see what happened to my BRD. Okay, so this one right here, I'll just randomly walk through and I'll tell you what I had to do throughout all of these parts. There are times when I'm spread very thin across a bunch of different projects. There are times where I have to play a lot of defense in protecting my time. Why? Because if I'm spread across a bunch of different projects, every project tries to put a claim onto my time. And if I try to attend every single meeting that I'm invited to, there's no way that I'm going to get anything done. And then what happens to me as a result of that is that I look like I'm not very good at being an analyst. Why? Because I'm not producing anything. Why? Because everybody is pulling me in to every single meeting that they have. And instead of defending my calendar, I'm just going along with whatever requests people make of my time. So what do I do? What do I do? I block off big chunks of my calendar. You see this one right here that says BRD prep. That is just me. Okay. I'm blocking my calendar. I'm not inviting anybody to this meeting. This is just me blocking my calendar to say I need to prepare for about an hour and a half so that I can run this workshop right here that comes right after it. If I don't do this and I don't do my prep work ahead of time and I show up to a workshop unprepared, I've done reputational damage to my own career now, because now I've wasted people's time, and there's very senior people in this workshop here, right? So this meeting right here, this meeting block right here is just me. I'm meeting with myself to prepare, all right? You'll see that when I go up, there are blocks that I put into my calendar, because the first hour of my day, every week, nobody puts a claim on that hour. Okay, that is my hour. I come in and I make sure I'm aligning everything that needs to be done on that day. And I'm making sure that I have focused time for my key priorities. All right. The only time you see the word office hours here, we were teaching a course. So I was teaching a course while I was doing this client engagement. And I said, okay, you know what? I have to sacrifice this because I have to show up to office hours because our students have questions. But that's an exception, right? That's a trade-off I have to make. Outside of that, my first hour is my hour, and I don't let anybody take it. And they can start to book me in. They can book me in right after that hour if they need to for anything else. But the reason why I do this is because when I have my focused hour here, typically what I can do is, let's say, for example, I have my focused hour. whatever this meeting is, I can come in here ready to deliver. So if somebody's inviting me to a meeting where they want me to contribute to something, I'm spending a little bit of an hour just going through the materials just to make sure that I know what I'm talking about here and that I can contribute properly. I don't just show up cold to a meeting. Okay. Any questions about any of this so far? No? There's a couple of different ways, and I know, James, maybe you want to have some time for questions afterwards, but I have a lot of information to share right now. I'd like to just take a poll and ask, would you rather me continuing to talk about my calendar and the day in the life of and kind of how I run my projects through the frameworks that I have, or would you like me to talk a little bit about what it takes to select a domain? Maybe HR isn't the right domain for you. Third thing we can talk about is to actually just keep on going down and I can keep on talking about the specific domain and just teach you what all these different processes are. Maybe in the chat, let's do a, put in the chat, put in a 1 if you want me to continue just talking about my day. Okay, so that's a 1. If you want me to talk a little bit about how you can select a domain, put in a 2. If you want to just keep on going down and continuing to learn about HR, let's put down a 3. Okay, and I'll keep an eye on the chat. And let me see, do I even know how to open the chat here? Let me just double check that. And I think we are getting lots of 2s. So we have lots of 2s and we have lots of 3s. Okay, 2s and 3s. Let's do the 2. We haven't talked about domain selection yet. So let's address that. And then we'll spend the rest of our time talking about going back to the HR domain, and I'll just walk you through the rest of the process to kind of explain to you how things work. Okay, so when it comes to choosing a domain for your own business analysis career, you can really kind of look at that universe of domains in 1 or 2 different ways. Okay, some people say, I want to become a business analyst in healthcare, or I want to become a business analyst in banking or manufacturing or oil and gas, or really kind of choose almost any market. Okay, these are, in business terms, they call these vertical markets. Okay, you can choose any of these and go down inside that and find yourself really a more I would say a smaller piece of healthcare. Okay, so if you just say healthcare on its own, that's a gigantic box full of subjects you could be specializing in, right? But within healthcare, you can go in and you can find an area within healthcare that you think you want to specialize in. Okay, but if you take this approach, what you're essentially doing is that you're essentially choosing a market that you're interested in, vertical market, and what you're doing is you're trying to find some niche specialty in that vertical market. Okay, and oil and gas is probably not even, like, this is probably part of the broader energy market. Let's say, for example, you can go work in an energy, and that energy and oil and gas could be one of the areas in energy. Another one could be solar, right? Another one could be nuclear, right? Nuke, I'll just say NUC. Okay, that's kind of one approach to figuring out and starting to do a little bit of exploration for domains you are interested in. Second is what is called the bifunctional areas. So instead of saying, hey, I want to be in healthcare, you say, I don't care what industry I'm in, because I'm way more interested in specializing by the functions that a company performs, right? And this is kind of what I've done. And not really what I've done, I've just kind of landed here, right? To me, it doesn't matter to me if the company I'm working for is in this sector or in this sector or this sector or this sector, because I've decided, hey, I'm going to just specialize in HR. It doesn't really matter which industry I'm in. Okay. benefit of looking at the world through this worldview is that your playing field is way bigger, because there isn't a single company on the face of the earth that does not need HR, right? Same thing goes for very basic functions like finance, just as important. Finance people would say even more important than HR, right? But these, looking at the world through this lens, is a lot, and I recommend a lot of business analysts to do this because it gets you away from all of the distractions of the new big thing that's coming about, right? I think there's, generally speaking, there tends to be this mindset amongst professionals to say, I just want to hop on the newest, hottest thing because I think it's going to pay me the most and I think it is going to last the longest. And that mindset is a little bit flawed in many ways. Because if you want to build a solid career, solid, long-lasting analysis career, and that's your objective for choosing the domain to specialize in, you want to go with something that every single company in the world needs and that they are likely going to need for basically ever. Okay? You cannot get away from those basic functions that every company has to perform. There is never going to be a day in my lifetime where a company says, hey, we don't need a finance department anymore. That day is never going to come. And I'll tell you, despite what some folks might say about AI, that day is never going to come for HR either. Definitely not in my lifetime. Okay. And so instead of chasing the shiny object and saying, hey, I want to be an AI business analyst, or I want to be whatever, the next big thing is I want to be an agile business. And that's fine. You can learn agile, but that's not your domain. That's not your specialty, right? Your specialty is what area of business and what area of business very specifically are you capable of having intelligent conversations with the customers in a meaningful way that shows them that they can trust you to get the job done, right? There are tried and true domains out there. Like I said, HR might not be the right one for you. The sales world is a lot more exciting, actually, than HR, if you're looking for a domain to be in. And I'll tell you, just from my experiences, when it comes to company allocating resources to projects, they are way more likely to allocate a project to support their sales processes than they are to support their HR processes. They'll support HR, but they say to themselves, hey, if we can improve our sales processes and bring more money into the door, and that helps us kind of has a direct impact on how much money we can generate, yeah, the sales folks in most organizations kind of get treated way better than everybody else. Right? So if you're looking at the hierarchy, it's typically salespeople get treated really well, fulfillment people get treated fairly well, finance people get treated fairly well, and then last but not least, most organizations, that's when they start to think about HR. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind. Is your HR technology going to be the most exciting thing to work on? No. Is your company going to give you the are they going to give most of the funding and attention to HR processes and systems? Probably not. But they're never going to not need HR, and there's always room for improvement in this domain. Okay. Those are the two broad ways that you can kind of look at whether you want to select a domain or not. The thing I would say here is that you have to know your job market. That is key to choosing a domain. Okay. The job markets that you have access to should be the ones that you pay very close attention to. Because if you're thinking to yourself, hey, I want to go into oil and gas, let's say, for example, but I live in a place where there is no oil and gas industry, or I don't have access to markets where oil and gas can hire me, you might be interested in that subject matter, but there's no work for you in the job markets that you have access to. Okay. I didn't choose HR because I thought it was the most exciting thing. I just fell into it. I worked on an HR project, and then another company hired me to do another HR project, and then another company hired me to do another HR project, and then, well, there you go. The decision's been made for me. I'm now an HR expert, right? In my domain knowledge. I have some expertise, I should say, in HR in my domain knowledge. I didn't choose it. If I did what I wanted to do, you probably try to get towards a more exciting domain. But the fact that I just have all the expertise now makes it easier for me to run. I can do really, really good on HR projects now because I have all that domain knowledge. And that's kind of how domains get chosen. So you might be interested in something. Look, I'll tell you another story. When I went from high school into university, I wanted to study economics. And in my first year of university, I realized there's no jobs for people in economics. And that's why I switched over to an IT program. And I started to learn to do a lot of the analysis work. And that is the primary driver, essentially, of how you choose a domain. So for you, look at what are you surrounded by? In Toronto, what is big? In Toronto, industry-wise, if we're looking at it from a vertical markets point of view like this, in Toronto, banking is huge, okay? Investments, capital markets is huge. Insurance is a very, very big industry, and there's tons of work in all of those areas in Toronto. And if I'm not looking at it from a vertical point of view, then I know that there's always work in all of the functional areas. Okay. If I was down in Texas, okay, or if I was up in Calgary, oil and gas is the best bet because there is a massive oil and gas industry in that state and in that province in Canada, in Alberta, Canada. Okay. And that's what I would use to try to kind of make the judgment call instead of what I'm interested in. So we had a lot of other threes. AI, business analyst, automation is not always, I see the comment from James, yes. Automation is not always the best solution, which is very, very true. Let's spend a couple of more minutes and just go through. I'll just give you a walkthrough of the business architecture so you understand the different areas of HR that you can specialize in. The one other thing that I'll say about domains is that it's important to specialize in a domain, but you can specialize even more deeply if you specialize in this very specific system. So for example, this example that we have of we've changed the name up a little bit here, but if you look at SAP SuccessFactors, right? Let me quickly pull up their website if I can quickly pull that up here. Let's open that up. Let's open this up here. We'll say SAP Success. This is a software product. Okay, let's pull that up and share it here. This is the product that we're talking about. Instead of just learning specifically about HR, you could actually just take it one level deeper and learn it from this product's point of view. Okay, SAP is a massive company. They have a ton of different products here. If you're looking at their human capital management system here, this is the area where you're going to run into their SuccessFactors product. And once you kind of learn the product, you pick up domain knowledge just from learning the product, because it's hard to understand what the product does if you don't understand the business. So sometimes just learning the product can teach you the domain knowledge way more quickly than if you were just trying to pick up domain knowledge on its own. So this is one strategy, is to pick a product that is popular in the markets that you operate in. Again, this one is a sure bet if you're in the HR world. Workday, this one right here is a sure bet for enterprise scale IT products. Okay, so if we go back to the Workday, this is Workday specializes in doing. They've broadened out, but if you look at their human capital management system, this is their product there, and of course the other big one, Oracle HCM. Let's just say. Oracle HCM is this is a completely different product, right? Most companies will just choose one of these and that'll become their core HR system. So if there's a specific company you want to work for, you could probably go on their LinkedIn page and see what kind of analyst they have. If they have an Oracle HCM analyst that working for the company, chances are that this is the product that they're using, right? And that might help you to decide that this is the product that you want to start learning for your specialization. I see another comment here. James says, also becoming a generic BA by learning core BA skills and techniques allows working in any domain. Yes, I started in corp business and registries, life sciences, and now in energy. Didn't have any knowledge of, yeah, that's right. That's a good point, James, because if you don't want to specialize, okay, there may be some of you who do not want to specialize. And what I'll do here is I'll just go to my own LinkedIn profile here just to show you the specifics of what I've done over my career here. If you were to go down to my experiences section, I think James and I have had a very, very similar career path because I've started my business analysis career in government. Then I moved to the nuclear industry. So this company builds nuclear power plants, and I did a bunch of projects for them. And then I went into insurance. Okay. And so they do health and dental insurance. This is a certification body that certifies insurance professionals in Canada. This company right here provides benefits provider. This company right here provides mutual fund software. So I went totally out of all of those industries and went into mutual funds. Then I worked for a university. Then I worked for another oil energy sector client through a consulting company. Then I went back into that same insurance company. And then I went into the software industry, right? But I was doing this, by this point, it didn't matter what I was doing because here I did HR, okay? Here I did HR. And down here, most of what I was doing here at the university was also HR related, okay? So I'm a generalist analyst. I'll tell you, it is a lot more stressful as a consultant, especially if I walk into a company, I have no idea what the business is about. I'm very stressed for the first couple of weeks because I have to very quickly learn that domain before I can really produce at the level that I want. Okay, so the benefit of not specializing is that so if you want to remain a generalist and just sharpen your VA skills and just jump from domain to domain, that's a perfectly legitimate career strategy. But just know that you're going to be stressed out every time you switch domains because there's a learning curve involved. And you might get really, really good at one domain and then switch to another domain and feel like, wow, I feel like I've taken a step back because I now have to relearn all of the things that I need to know before I can start producing for my clients or for my customers, right? So there's benefits and drawbacks. Look, I'm not an HR domain specialist. I know a lot about HR. I know the domain inside out, but I'm not committed to HR because there's some likelihood I'm going to go back and work for this client here and I'll go back into the insurance industry, right? And so I don't have, I'm not fully committed to my domain, but I have HR in my back pocket as the domain that I can rely on because I know it very well. Quite frankly, I know the insurance industry quite well too. And just even from this job right here, before I got my mutual fund job, one of the things I did was I went and got certified as I got the certification right here. It's a license. It's the entry level license for working within the financial sector, essentially. So I know quite a bit about investments and mutual funds as well. I'm a bit of I wouldn't call myself a total expert, but I worked on a lot of projects here that are very, very deeply, deeply rooted in the actual domain, right? If I was to go and, if we were trying to figure out, hey, how are you handling the business rules for these very specific types of transactions in the mutual fund world? I better understand how those transactions work, and I better know what a mutual fund is and how it how it gets purchased and how it gets disposition. Like there's a lot involved, right? And being able to do that. So hopefully, I mean, I know we're approaching time, but I'll keep on going, James, and you can just stop me whenever you think we are at time. Because we saw a lot of other threes. We saw a lot of threes, and I think a lot of folks out here want to kind of understand the HR domain a little bit more. We've talked about the processes that are related to recruitment, right? This box right here is all of the processes that they have to execute to get somebody hired. Once the person's hired, then there is typically an onboarding process. And so before the person even arrives at the company, these are the processes the company has to go through just to get everything set up for them. And then there's their day one process where they show up, and the company typically has a very standardized way of treating a person when they show up on day one, right? And that is their day one process. Then you have the 3-month sometimes 3 to 6 month probationary period, which is in some companies is part of the onboarding, in some companies it's part of performance. Companies kind of split it up differently. That's all it takes to get a person into the company. Anytime you want to go on a leave, let's say, hey, I'm sick and I need short-term disability, there's a whole process they have to go through to make that happen. Anytime you want to come back, there's a whole another process, depending on legislation and how your jurisdiction defines what they have to do to bring you back into work safely. There's a whole process they have to go through to do that. Some people have to track their times, entering in timesheets, right? If you're an hourly worker, typically in many jurisdictions, you have to track your time very, very specifically because there's a lot of tax implications. There's a lot of benefits implications of how much time you work. If you're a salaried employee, different ballgame, right? How does that time get valued inside the company? So let's say, for example, I worked a lot of overtime and I banked it. Well, the company has to track that because they have to show that on their finances as a liability, right? So now there's this whole valuation process that is involved in time. Time has to make its way into the payroll systems and a bunch of other systems for time to be managed properly throughout the organization. Okay. When you get hired into a compensation and pay package. Payroll has to process that on a biweekly or a monthly basis. You have yearly compensation changes. So you might have a yearly process. Most companies have a yearly process here where they have to say, hey, we're going to give you a cost of living increase. On top of that, you might have a merit increase where based on your performance, you might get a massive pay raise, right? And that's a yearly cycle that the company has to go through for all their employees. Sometimes these off-cycle compensation changes might happen where they say, you know what, you just got promoted. So even though it's not the yearly compensation cycle, we gotta change your compensation package now because you're now in a different position or you've moved somewhere or whatever's happened that's changed your compensation package. And then there's a lot of provider management. They have to manage some of these processes are outsourced oftentimes. And so if you have outsourced any of these processes above, you have to manage the companies that are doing that work. Okay. Same thing goes for benefits. You got to get enrolled. And benefits are things like you might have, let's say, a company car. You might have life insurance. You might have your pension contributions. So there's so many other benefits on top of the pay that they give you. And those benefits have to be managed somehow. Okay. I'll say last but not least here, terminations process. Sometimes you want to leave the company, in which case they have to follow the voluntary separation process or the voluntary termination process. Sometimes the company wants to part ways with the employee, and that's when you get into involuntary terminations. And these processes operate very, very differently inside the company. Sometimes the company has to let a lot of people go, unfortunately, because they have, whatever situation going on in their business. And then for that, they have to go through an even different process. Okay. So those are like mass terminations, they call them. In a nutshell, that's kind of like the majority of the business processes that exist within HR. There are some other learning and development ones and a bunch of other ones we won't get into, but I know it is time, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time here. So I'm open for any questions if you guys want to stick around and ask them. Hopefully it's been enlightening and you've learned a little bit about HR and domain specialties as a whole.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. Thanks so much, Amal. I really appreciate you taking the time to present. If anyone has any questions, you can use the Q&A tab, or you can come off mute and ask your question directly. We'll give it another 2 minutes because I know we kind of did start a little bit late.
Yeah. So I think we have a Q&A session here that says, can you specialize in more than one function? Shirley asked that earlier. Short answer to that, Shirley, is yes, absolutely. You can specialize in as many areas as your brain will let you absorb and be effective with. And I think everybody has a bit of a different tolerance for that, right? Some people say, no, the way that I typically see it broken down is typically a person will say, hey, I do the recruitment. I'm a recruitment specialist. Like you could just pick this and that could be your HRBA domain for the rest of your life if you want. That's enough. There's enough in there for you to be able to specialize in all of those, just supporting all of those processes. If you want to say, hey, I just want to be a specialist in the requisition process, you probably won't be worth that much on the job market. So you want to be able to kind of handle this entire recruitment box. And if you can, you want to try to extend yourself into onboarding if you can. Okay. Time management is so complicated that there are people who say, I only do time management. And that is and because the business logic and the scenarios and everything, it can get so complex. There's enough room in that bucket for you to just say, hey, I'm a time tracking expert in SAP. And that's it. That's your only job. Right. So it all depends. But again, you'll see that what I've done in my career is that I get a little bit too restless when I've learned something and it's become easy and I'm starting to get bored. I get restless. And so I'm like, I need stress and adventure. And you can't separate those two from each other a lot of times, right? If you want adventure, the stress just comes with it. So I say, look, I just want to go do something that's totally different than anything I've ever done. And I'm just going to have to deal with the stress. So that you got to kind of figure out what your own personality type is like and what kind of tolerance you have for that. But the thing I love about this career is that you have so much room. You have so many options, endless amount of options. You got to figure out how much what type of person am I and how much do I want to do? Do I value stability? Do I just want to learn once and just do it for the rest of my life? Or do I want to just keep on jumping from place to place and learning new things? Okay. Hopefully that answers your question. Shirley. Jose asks, HRIS, are those user-friendly, easy to learn and work with, or somehow quote unquote clunky? Jose, HRIS, most enterprise systems are very clunky. Look, I'm just going to keep it real here, okay? They're not, if you look at consumer products, like you look at Google's Gmail, or you look at consumer products, have to be very easily usable and they have to be very slick because the consumer has control over whether they're going to use your product or not, right? In enterprise, that pressure doesn't exist. Like me, if let's say I'm a recruiter at a company, I don't get to decide whether I'm going to use success factors or not. If the company decides that's what I'm using, that's what I'm using. That takes away the company, SAP's incentive to win me over because I don't have a choice in the matter. I have to use the product. And as a result of the fact that they don't compete on the fact that they have the best usability on the product. They don't compete on that fact. They compete on the fact they say, look, our product's been here for 20 years, which means we've worked out all of the kinks out of it. All of the processes here are going to run flawlessly. What it looks like on the user interface side, they're like, they don't really care. And as a result, I mean, success factors clunky, yeah, somewhat. It's way better than the previous version of SAP, though. But it's nowhere near what you're going to get in the consumer products world. So, hopefully that answers your question. And hey, that's not going to change. And because the factors that exist within enterprise, those factors are not conducive to people making like very, very good products, right? They're good in the sense that they're solid, but they're not good usability wise most of the time. So that's the world we live in, unfortunately. Jose says, makes sense. Product adapting to customer versus customer needing to adapt to the system. Yeah, in corporate, in enterprise, it's oftentimes, especially if it's a product that you have purchased. For if your company decides to build its own HR system in-house and they have very good developers and good UX people and good analysts, you can build a really, really great product that is very good at usability. It's just not worth for the company to build an in-house system when they can just go and buy one because it is software development is just so risky and so expensive that they'd rather just go and pay a company like SAP or Workday to say, we're just going to buy your HCM, we're going to implement it. Sure, it's not the best usability wise, but we're here to work. We're not, this isn't, we're not scrolling on Instagram here to have fun. You don't have to make it look good. So yeah, that unfortunately that's just the way enterprise functions, and that's why most internal products that they build are not going to focus on usability and that type of quality. Now, the insurance company I worked for in the past, they were building products for their customers. So they were building external products. Those products were slick, okay? Because when we're trying to sell a product, instead of trying to use it internally inside the company, then usability starts to matter a lot more because it'll get judged, right? When your product is up against another competitors and yours has better usability, you might now try to compete with in that sector. You might try to compete on that fact, even though, probably it's not a huge thing, but there's a lot more emphasis when you're building external products for your customers. But again, the limits, if you're selling to like business to business, you're selling into enterprise, they're not going to be like. Now, if you're starting a startup and you're building a company or a product for consumers, your attitude is going to be the total opposite. It has to be the easiest, simplest, nicest looking thing that exists out there. Otherwise, you're not going to get any traction on that product. All right. Hopefully that answers any questions. Do we have any other questions that folks want to ask?
I think we've run out of time, but I think we could talk about this all day. But
Yeah.
it's been very insightful. Really, thanks so much, Emal, again for speaking, and thanks so much everyone for joining and sticking around. I hope you enjoyed this session, and we will be having another day in the life of a BA. It'll be our last one next week, so that'll be the last one for the year. So stay tuned on LinkedIn, and if you want to connect with Emal on LinkedIn, please feel free to do so. And if you have any other questions around anything that was discussed today, you can reach out directly to Emal. But
One last note, I'll say our chief marketing officer at BA Blocks keeps telling me that I forget to tell people about our courses. I'm just going to put that up here, bablocks.com. You can check it out because, every time I get so engrossed in having the conversation, I forget to tell people that, hey, we actually teach business analysts how to do this job too. So, so let's not forget about that. She'll be super mad at me if I don't at least mention it. So I just wanted to put that out there. But thank you, everybody, for the great questions. And thank you, James, for the invitation.
Absolutely. Okay. We can leave it there then, but have a great evening, afternoon, night, wherever you're joining from, and I will see you soon.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.